May 1st, 1943. Altitude 24,000 feet. Temperature 30 degrees. Speed 150 knots. A B-17 Flying Fortress limps home over the Bay of Biscay, leaking fire and trailing smoke. Half the tail is gone. The intercom is dead. Ammunition belts are sparking. The floor has melted into open sky. And inside that ruined metal cage, one man is still fighting. Two crewmen have already bailed out. The radio's destroyed. The oxygen's gone. But in the flaming rear fuselage, Staff Sergeant Maynard Snuffy Smith is on his knees, dragging a wounded gunner from a burning tail, while firing back with one hand. They told him he was undisciplined, that he'd get someone killed, that he didn't belong up there. But now, he's the only reason anyone's still alive. They gave him one gun, one chance, one mission. And at 24,000 feet, while the plane burned around him, he refused to let go. Maynard Harrison Smith didn't want to be there. And truthfully, the Army hadn't wanted him either. He was 31 years old when the draft caught up, nearly a decade older than the men he trained with. Before enlistment, he worked odd jobs: mail sorter, gas clerk, sometimes nothing. He'd been fined for disorderly conduct, fought with authority. He had no wife, no kids, no reason to fight, except that the war had finally come for him. And when it did, the system didn't celebrate. It processed. At basic, he stood out for the wrong reasons. Too mouthy, too cynical, always late. He skipped morning formations, called out instructors, once told a drill sergeant, "You don't scare me, I've had worse bosses." The line got him latrine duty for 2 weeks, and a reputation as a man better left alone. Others in his training class were sent to officer school, intelligence, command tracks. Smith was routed to gunnery. At gunnery school, it got worse. He qualified barely. Technically competent, but openly disinterested. "He's not dependable," read one review. Another, "uncooperative, lacks discipline." But his eyesight was sharp, his hands steady. That was enough to push him through the pipeline. Just enough to make him someone else's problem. When a last-minute opening appeared on a B-17 crew, just hours before takeoff, someone in admin scribbled his name. He was shipped to the 306th Bomb Group. No handshake, no ceremony. Just, "You're up." The crew wasn't happy. Snuffy, they called him, half as a joke, half as a warning, the fill-in, the reject. The guy who got picked because no one else was left. He didn't know their names, and they didn't learn his. They gave him the worst post, the ball turret. A metal sphere bolted under the belly, alone, cramped, no escape hatch. If the hydraulics failed, you died inside it. It was his first combat flight. He didn't smile, he didn't pray. He climbed into the turret, locked the hatch, and vanished into the machine. Smith wasn't chosen. He was assigned. Not out of confidence, but out of necessity. Systems don't build heroes, they sort bodies. And the ones they overlook, sometimes they're the last ones standing. The real test doesn't start in training. It starts when you're unwanted, unheard, and unproven, yet still show up. The tarmac at Thurley Airfield was wet. Dawn hadn't broken yet. Men loaded bombs by lamplight. Mechanics barked about oil leaks. In the distance, the hum of 4-engine bombers rolled like thunder waiting to lift. It was May 1st, 1943, and Snuffy Smith, the least wanted man on the base, was suiting up for his first and possibly last combat mission. No one spoke to him. He stood outside the hard stand, fastening the bulky layers, wool, silk, and the thick sheepskin flight suit. Oxygen mask, flak vest, heated gloves. Each layer was protection, not just from enemy fire, but from altitude itself. 24,000 feet was death without it. He checked his 50 caliber machine guns, locked the turret rotation manually, touched every surface twice. Then came the long crawl. To reach the ball turret, you had to slide beneath the plane's belly. Once inside, you couldn't wear a parachute. It didn't fit. If the plane took a hit and locked the hatch, you died. It was called flying the coffin. The Army said every position mattered. But this one? It was survival on a swivel. Cold, cramped, exposed. Smith climbed in alone. The crew went through pre-flight checks above. Engines roared to life. The bomb load was heavy. St. Nazaire was no routine run. It was one of the most heavily defended targets in the Luftwaffe's range. The U-boat pens were dug deep and ringed with flak. Nearly every crew who'd flown there had brought someone home dead or burning. No one told Smith that. They figured he'd find out. And so he sat, alone, silent, locked in a steel globe, waiting for the sky to open up and try to kill him. They crossed the French coast just past 11:20 a.m. Below them, the estuary of the Loire. Ahead, Saint-Nazaire, the most heavily fortified U-boat pens on the Atlantic. Above them, clear blue sky. But that wouldn't last. Snuffy Smith adjusted his grip in the ball turret. The belly of the plane hummed. He had no parachute. Couldn't wear one. It wouldn't fit. If something went wrong, there'd be no escape. He exhaled slowly, shifted his fingers over the twin 50s. The first explosion came without warning. A black puff of flak, then another, closer, then a blast directly beneath the wing. The aircraft rocked. Smith's turret jerked hard. Alarms buzzed. The formation tightened. Intercom crackled. Brace. More ahead. He swung left. Another burst. Shrapnel peppered the fuselage. He saw it from beneath. Holes opening along the tail. Pieces of aluminum flaked off like ash in wind. Then the flak stopped. That's when the fighters came. 12 Focke-Wulf 190s dropped out of the clouds in formation. Black propellers spinning, guns already flashing, they split into attack groups. Smith tracked one, fired. Short bursts. The turret bucked. His tracers arced upward, found their mark. One fighter pulled off, smoking. Another dove past him. He fired again. It disappeared in seconds. The crew shouted updates over the intercom. The top turret jammed. The nose gunner was out of ammo. The tail gunner didn't answer. A second wave approached. They came faster, tighter. A pair flanked low. Smith turned, fired blind. Hits. Sparks. Then another plane hit the B-17's tail square on. The aircraft shuddered. Something exploded near the rear. Fire! Someone screamed. Smoke began pouring into the fuselage. Smith climbed out of the turret. The heat hit him first. Metal walls radiating with flame. Oxygen lines hissed. The radio operator lay unconscious. The tail gunner was crumpled near his gun, legs pinned. The fire was spreading toward the ammo crates. Smith moved. No order, no hesitation. He dragged the gunner backward through the smoke. His gloves burned. The floor had melted open in spots. He stepped around glowing edges, dragging the body behind him. Reached the waist hatch. Found an extinguisher. Sprayed. Nothing. Grabbed a blanket. Beat back flames. Sparks lit his collar on fire. He tore it off. Then the ammunition started to cook off. Pops. Cracks. Then a detonation. One of the crates burst. Smith shielded the gunner with his own body. Held still. Waited for the fire to swallow them. It didn't. He got back up, pulled the man farther forward, slumped him against the fuselage wall, then turned around. He could have stopped there. But the guns were unmanned now, and the next wave was already coming. Smith returned to the waist windows, loaded new belts, positioned himself at both left and right mouths, alternating between them. He fired on approach, moved fast, no support, no visibility. Another fighter hit the starboard wing, more shaking, more screaming metal. Smith kept firing. He felt blood from a cut on his cheek, but didn't stop. The smoke stung his lungs. He coughed violently, saw black spots, sat down for 3 seconds, then stood back up, fired again. The fourth wave didn't press as hard. They saw the B-17 was still in the air, but damaged. They circled, took potshots, then withdrew. For 90 minutes, Smith had fought alone in the rear of a burning aircraft. No backup, no oxygen, no relief, just instinct. When the last FW-190 peeled away, the plane was still flying. The fire was out. The tail gunner was alive. The crew called out, amazed. Snuffy didn't answer. He was kneeling in the wreckage, half his flight suit burned, hands blistered, eyes red, and still gripping the gun. They had called him unreliable, undisciplined, a problem. But when everything caught fire at 24,000 feet, he was the only one still fighting. The B-17 was still flying, but just barely. Its wings were scarred, riddled with holes. One engine was sputtering. Another had already gone cold. Inside the fuselage, smoke still clung to the walls like a living thing. Oxygen lines had melted. Floor panels had fused. 2 gunners were unconscious. And Smith, bruised, burned, and alone in the rear, was still upright. Above the English Channel, the crew tried to regain control. The pilot shouted coordinates to the navigator, but the intercom only half worked. The tail section, what was left of it, dragged slightly left. The controls weren't responsive. The B-17 wobbled like a dying bird. Enemy fighters hadn't finished. They came back in singles. Not waves now, just stragglers. Opportunists. One at 7 o'clock high. Smith spotted it, swung the waist gun around. The barrel was hot to the touch. He had no time to care. He fired. The rounds lit up the sky. The fighter turned away. But not before it fired a parting shot. The round tore through the fuselage wall. It passed inches from Smith's leg. He felt the heat, not the hit. Sat down, gritted his teeth, got up again, near death, first time. Then another call from the cockpit. Fuel leak. They couldn't make it to the original base. They'd have to land short, closer to the coast. Visibility was dropping. Weather rolling in. They were losing altitude. Smith moved toward the tail again. Instinct told him something was wrong. He found the wounded gunner slipping in and out of consciousness. His leg was swollen. Blood loss was heavy. Morphine was gone. The med kit had been half-cooked in the fire. Smith did what he could, cut fabric from his own collar, tied a tourniquet. Then came the second brush. Another fighter, this one unseen, fired a burst from below, the rounds stitched through the belly. One ripped the edge of the turret base. Metal and flame burst upward. Smith fell hard, head smacked the floor. Dazed, dizzy, he blinked. Fire again. Crawled, hand over hand, toward the extinguisher. It was empty, so he used his gloves, beat it down, smothered it with the remains of a flak vest, rolled his body over the heat and waited. Skin blistered through the flight suit, but it held. Near death, second time. He didn't count these moments. He had no time. His mind moved by reflex. Breathe, brace, fire, move. The bomber creaked, the nose dipped, then leveled. He looked back, out the open shell of the fuselage where the tail once was. Sky and smoke. Then, the third time. Not from flak, not from bullets, from inside. Smith's lungs gave out. The smoke, the heat, the carbon monoxide, it finally caught up. He staggered, collapsed, one hand still gripping the gun mount. He couldn't breathe. Black spots filled his eyes. He felt weightless, heard nothing, just silence. He thought, this is it. But his body wasn't ready. Something pulled him back. Maybe the cold. Maybe the memory of the man lying wounded behind him. Maybe just defiance. He vomited, gasped. Coughs turned into breath. He got up again. Near death. Third time. By then, the cockpit had spotted English soil. They had radioed ahead, barely. Ground crews knew a crippled bird was coming in, missing half its tail, with wounded aboard and no flaps. Smith crawled toward the forward section. He saw eyes widen as he passed. Blackened face, burned hands, flight suit torn to the knees. No one said a word. He sat beside the gunner, held him steady. One last descent. There's a moment in every soldier's story when endurance crosses into something else. Smith didn't stay alive because he was trained to. He stayed alive because he refused to do anything else. His lungs failed, his flesh burned, his mind blurred. But he kept moving. The system didn't design him for this. It barely tolerated him. And yet, when the aircraft became a furnace, the quiet, unwanted man in the back became the one person death couldn't reach. The runway at Portreath was short, rough, and not meant for bombers. But the B-17 had no other choice. Their home base at Thurley was too far. Engines were failing, systems wrecked. They'd barely stayed airborne across the channel. Now the pilots circled low, skimming the Cornish cliffs. One wheel refused to lower. The flaps weren't responding. Smith stayed in the rear fuselage, holding the wounded tail gunner's weight against his shoulder. The floor was still warm from flame. The skin of the aircraft trembled with every gust. The wounded man coughed blood. Smith spoke to him, not with comfort, but clarity. Don't move. Not yet. Below, ground crews scrambled. Word had come by emergency radio. A bomber coming in torn to pieces, damage to tail and midsection, fire reported on board. Medics waited by jeeps. Mechanics ran with extinguishers. When the aircraft came into view, one man said aloud, "How is that thing still flying?" The B-17 touched down too fast. The wheels groaned. The left side dipped, one tire was shredded. The wing tilted. The aircraft swerved slightly, veered left, then slammed back straight. The tail dragged, screeching metal across the tarmac. Sparks flew. The plane skidded for 300 yards, then stopped. Silence. Then smoke. Then hissing. Then the rear hatch opened. Smith didn't step out. He handed the tail gunner forward to the waist gunner, then followed slowly. One boot, then the other. The sunlight hit his face. His mask was half melted. His hands were black with soot and blood. His flight suit was torn down the side, seams frayed from crawling across burning steel. The medics looked past him, expecting someone else. "Where's the man from the rear?" Smith turned. "That was me." The ground crew stared. One walked into the plane to see the damage. He came back out shaking his head. The fire started at the tail and burned forward. Looks like a goddamn blowtorch was inside. Another opened the ammo crates. Charred, warped, half exploded. The floor beneath was melted through in places. The machine guns were scorched. One barrel fused. There were strips of cloth stuffed into oxygen leaks. The radio was gone. Nothing in the rear half should have survived. And yet, someone had. The mechanics reported the damage to command. They had never seen a plane land in that condition. Not without crashing, not with wounded aboard, not with a gunner still inside. Smith refused medical attention. Said he was fine, asked for a cigarette, sat on the tarmac while they loaded the wounded man onto a stretcher. Didn't speak, didn't salute, just stared at the aircraft, burned, bent, and somehow still whole. A corporal from another squadron approached. "You the ball gunner?" Smith nodded. "We heard you stayed back there." Smith didn't respond, just nodded again. No dramatics, no speeches. No one knew yet that a Medal of Honor citation had just begun writing itself inside a pile of ashes and steel. Smith didn't care. He had done his job, and walked out of the fire to prove it. They didn't believe him at first, not entirely. After the landing, after the wounded were evacuated, after the ground crews logged the damage and swore it couldn't be real, the Army wanted reports. Debriefs. Paperwork. Who had done what? Why 2 men had bailed out? Why the tail gunner had survived? Why the rear of the aircraft looked like it had been cooked from the inside and yet still held together? Smith sat through the first debrief without speaking. The co-pilot did the talking. The pilot added his account, strained, defensive, still shaken. The engineer confirmed what he'd seen. Smith had been the only man in the back. The top turret had jammed. The nose gun had lost power. The left waist gunner had bailed out. Only one man had fired from the rear. Only one had moved through the fire to drag out the wounded. Only one had kept the plane level when everything else had burned. Smith shrugged. "I was just doing what I was trained to do." But it wasn't training. No manual said to cover a man with your body while the ammunition exploded behind you. No field guide told you to beat down fire with your hands. No diagram taught you how to man 2 guns at once while choking on smoke. Still, command had their doubts. A Medal of Honor is not handed out lightly. It requires eyewitnesses. Clear verification. In this case, the damage spoke louder than the man. The gunners who bailed out had nothing to add. The tail gunner was in a hospital bed, barely breathing, but awake. When asked who had pulled him from the flames, he didn't hesitate. "Snuffy. That bastard saved my life." The medal was approved. The first ever awarded to a member of the 8th Air Force. Smith received it 3 months later, in July 1943, at a small airfield ceremony in England. Photographers from Stars and Stripes were there. A general pinned the ribbon on his chest. The band played. Reporters asked for a quote. He said nothing. He didn't smile, didn't make a speech, just saluted, turned, and walked away. Later, the Army issued the official citation for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above beyond the call of duty. It listed the 90-minute solo defense, the wounded man saved, the fires extinguished, the damage to the aircraft, the refusal to abandon post. But none of that changed how the crews saw him. He was still Snuffy, still the fill-in, still the guy who didn't shave right, who talked back, who never followed the script. He flew more missions, completed 5 in total, but he was never promoted, never put in for leadership. He earned the highest award the country could give, and was still written up for insubordination weeks later for arriving late to roll call. The system could decorate him, but it couldn't accept him. Command didn't know what to do with a man like Smith. He wasn't a poster boy. He didn't want attention. He didn't give speeches. He didn't fit the mold. He had survived a hell almost no one could imagine, and walked away unchanged. In private, some gunners said he was a legend. Others said he was lucky. The press called him a hero. He refused to comment. When asked years later why he didn't make a career of it, why he didn't stay in, become an officer, use the medal to move up, he simply said, "It wasn't my style." There was no book, no tour, no fanfare. He did his job, then stepped away. He didn't ask to return to the same unit. The Army sent him there anyway. A week after receiving the Medal of Honor, Maynard Smith walked back onto the airfield at Thurley. Same barracks, same hangars, same men who had watched him climb into the ball turret months earlier without learning his name. Back then, he had been the joke. Snuffy the screw-up, the fill-in. The man you got stuck with when someone else dropped out. Now he was back with a ribbon he didn't wear, and a reputation no one knew how to handle. At first, no one said anything. Conversations stopped when he passed. not out of respect, but discomfort. The hierarchy had flipped, and no one had been briefed on how to act. Pilots who once dismissed him now nodded stiffly. Gunners who joked about his discipline watched him quietly from across the tarmac. One crew chief cleared his throat and muttered, "Heard you did all right." Smith didn't answer. He kept walking. Nothing about him had changed. He didn't tell stories, didn't explain himself, didn't correct rumors. He didn't wear the medal. He kept showing up late, kept talking back when orders didn't make sense. The system had rewarded his defiance once, but it didn't know what to do with it afterward. He flew again. 2 more missions. Quiet ones. No firestorms, no miracles, just competence. But by then the damage was done. Not to him, but to the assumptions around him. The men had seen what happened when the unwanted man in the back refused to quit. They had seen a burning aircraft land because someone no one trusted stayed where others left. And that knowledge unsettled them more than any medal ceremony ever could. Smith never became a leader, never trained officers, never gave speeches. He remained exactly what he had always been: difficult, capable, and uninterested in approval. When a new gunner asked one of the mechanics if the stories were true, the man shrugged and said, "Doesn't matter." Then, after a pause, added, "Plane landed, didn't it?" That was as close as Smith ever came to vindication. Not applause, not acceptance, just the quiet recognition that when everything failed, the man they wrote off had held the line. Smith didn't stay in the Army long after the war. He returned to civilian life quietly. No parade, no book deal. He worked for the IRS, lived in obscurity. In later years, his name surfaced now and then, whenever the Medal of Honor was mentioned, or when lists of forgotten heroes were drawn up for Memorial Day articles. But he gave no interviews, never stood on stage. The citation was enough for the world. It had never been enough for him. He died in 1984, buried in Michigan. No speeches, no generals. His headstone simply read, "Maynard H. Smith, Medal of Honor." It didn't say what for. It didn't mention that the mission almost failed, that others had bailed, that the plane had landed burning, that the man inside it had chosen to burn with it rather than leave one body behind. There were other heroes in the war: pilots who shot down more planes, commanders who led divisions across Europe, strategists who shaped the tide. But Smith had no plan. He had no arc. What he had was a moment. 90 minutes over Saint-Nazaire, when everything collapsed except him. History has a way of favoring those who fit the mold. Smith didn't. He wasn't photogenic. He wasn't humble. He wasn't polished. But inside a burning bomber, under enemy fire, when the odds fell to zero, he didn't. That's not heroism in the textbook sense. It's something rarer. A man stripped of rank and favor, doing the impossible not because he was told to, but because someone had to. History forgets the difficult men. It celebrates the symbols. But Smith wasn't made to inspire. He was made to survive. And in surviving, he forced the Army to reconsider what a problem soldier might do when everything else fails. His story wasn't told to make us proud. It was told to make us look again, at the names we overlook, the instincts we mistrust, the lines we draw too early. Smith didn't fit the war. But in one moment, the war fit him. And that was enough. Today, few Americans know the name Maynard Smith. His medal sits in a glass case. The aircraft he saved was likely scrapped years ago. The men he flew with, those who doubted him, those he saved, have all passed. What remains is a single line in military history: a gunner who stayed behind, alone, inside a burning plane, and brought it home. No statue, no movie, just a citation. But that's the shape of most real courage. It isn't clean. It isn't expected. It doesn't always look the way we want it to. Sometimes it wears the face of the man we almost sent home, the one we called difficult, the one we didn't trust. And sometimes that man becomes the reason a crew walks away from death. So remember him, not because he was perfect or even likable, but because when everything failed, he didn't. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else hear about the man who wouldn't quit, who walked through fire, not to prove anything, but because someone had to. Smith didn't save the war. He saved one plane. That was enough, because war doesn't always reward the best. It reveals the necessary.